Welcome back to another whiteboard chat, and today we're going to talk about prolactin. So I wanted to go over some of the relationships, or hormonal relationships, that prolactin has with other hormones, primarily sex hormones. Go over some of the things that might be a little more confusing, some of the things that you may commonly see in terms of negative feedback, and then also here with a little bit of PED talk, a little bit about interactions with some of the compounds, that some of the things that may be commonly confusing. So first off, prolactin, or PRL, is a pituitary hormone, has a ton of different functions. Generally, it's associated with female hormones, though males could potentially have some struggles with it, and males do need it as well. So I did a little section down here for the guys too. I know it's small, I have so much on here, so kind of stick with me. But the PRL enhances Leydig cells, so testosterone secretion, and probably can't read it very well, but spermatogenesis. So that could be potential reasons that you would need at least a physiological range or a physiological amount of prolactin in a male, right? And then also, it is kind of counter-regulatory with dopamine levels, hence why a lot of the drugs that may be used to lower prolactin are dopamine related, right? So that's why. Now, in women, generally it's considered the hormone that helps with breast milk production, though it does have some physiological purposes in women that are not pregnant as well. Okay, now we have that out of the way. What may cause high prolactin? Because that's generally what people want to know. What may cause high prolactin, or what side effects would maybe manifest from high prolactin? So in women, mood issues, possibly libido issues, because it is going to interact with dopamine, right? Possibly libido issues. Prolactin is highly correlated with orgasm during sex, so that's male and female. So like delayed orgasm, or even like ED issues in males, some of those things can be associated with high prolactin levels. First off, check levels. Like, don't just assume. Guys especially are so guilty of this, especially the ones that are enhanced, that use PEDs. They just assume because they take something or they feel something that they have high prolactin, and I will tell you that it is not very common. It's definitely not as common as you think it is. Yes, we'll see some elevation depending on compounds used or different scenarios, but it's really not as common as people think. And even those elevations normally aren't very significant, if you will. So just check it before people start just like guzzling down, pramipexole or cabergoline or things like that. Like, it's just, don't do that. Okay. First, next, look at some of the interactions here. There's a bunch of them, and it's important to understand that these things, like everything I talk about on these whiteboard chats, rarely is anything working in isolation. Okay. So first off, why might you see an elevated prolactin kind of in isolation by itself? Would be pituitary tumors. Pretty much the reason that you would see something like that, right? Generally, you would see elevation from a tumor, right? And it could lower your other primary sex hormones, testosterone, estrogen, and probably interfere with progesterone as well. So this, not common. Pituitary tumor impact causing hyperprolactinemia, not common. So it could happen if you're ruling out everything else, or you have like extremely high unexplainable prolactin levels. Then yeah, sure, definitely get checked for it. They can do imaging, they can check for it. It does happen. The only cases that I've actually seen were in females. that had some other hormonal issues going on, potentially related to that pituitary issue, right? Or stress, they were very highly stressed. So, not common, but it can happen. I think it's statistically considered relatively rare. All right, so estrogen and prolactin do have a connection here. Generally, the literature is going to show you that estrogen will raise prolactin. You see this mostly, especially in female research, during periods of their menstrual cycle where estrogen or estradiol is highest, you will see some rise in prolactin. It's not necessarily a set ratio of this much estradiol rise equals this much prolactin rise. And it's not a forever curve where it's going to keep going up and up and up. But yes, correlation there for sure. So next would be progesterone and prolactin, pretty inverse relationship there. And you're going to see, and I'm going to talk about this next, the estrogen dominance. Generally, progesterone goes up, prolactin goes down for the most part. You may see vice versa as well. Now, estrogen dominance will tie into these two pretty heavily. I know maybe I should have put that up there, but so you can imagine how seeing that correlation, that if you have estrogen dominance, you may also have hyperprolactinemia. Is that possible? For sure, it can happen. So again, we're kind of rooting back to that cause there. Yes, you may see that. And what also tends to be common in estrogen dominance is low progesterone. Now, estrogen dominance is really defined as a skewed ratio between estrogen and progesterone. It doesn't mean you have no progesterone, but generally a lot of the women do tend to have estrogen dominance, do tend to be on the low side of progesterone. So yes, you're going to see that correlation that ties into these first two pretty easily, right? And so does stress-induced hyperprolactinemia. Why? Well, is it a direct correlation? Not so much. Probably more so tied into this, because as we know, estrogen dominance or what is called progest, steal, from cortisol, right? So why? Well, again, we're looping back. A lot of things happening here, right? So cortisol goes up. This is a really terrible drawing. Cortisol going up, progesterone steal, skewed ratio. If estrogen's high, we see this, right? So you can see how, and then we see this flip, right? Because progesterone is now low, all right? So if you were to go online and you look up how to lower prolactin levels naturally, well, you might see a supplement called Vitex pop up, or Chaseberry, right? Why is that? Well, again, we're tying right back into this loop. Vitex, decrease in FSH, increase in LH. What is LH going to do? Increase progesterone. Boom, decrease prolactin. All right, you're starting to see the correlation, right? So you can see how all of these things are tied in. So generally, if I'm seeing hyperprolactinemia, it's really secondary to these issues that are more common, right? So we're commonly, like estrogen dominance, not an uncommon thing for when we're talking about female hormone imbalance. Progesterone steal, not uncommon, So these things generally are more so tied into these more common issues, like I said. So that's why you may see all this in correlation. So if you see that elevated prolactin level in the presence of, or if you see that elevated prolactin level or someone's concerned about it, these are the types of things I would probably be looking at first and foremost, generally because they're the most common. All right. Now, another one that may be relatively common is hypothyroid. So we're seeing TRH. Now, if we have, I just got my little drawing here. So hypothalamus, TRH to the anterior pituitary, and then that's going to signal our thyroid cascade, right? The rest of the thyroid cascade. So TSH, as you guys know, or probably know, signaling to the thyroid, and we have our T4, T3, right? So in hypo, hypothyroid, normally, you may see this disruption in the hypothalamus, right? And then that's going to disrupt our TRH and anterior pituitary, and we have disruption in our PRL production, right? So you could see this with a thyroid dysfunction issue. It's common, I would say, in thyroid dysfunction, more so in women. And the reason that stuff's more so in women too is because the range is going to be a lot bigger. So pregnant women, obviously, probably going to have a lot higher levels. Now, non-pregnant women will have it just as males will have it, but it's just the levels in males, the range is pretty low. So yes, you'll see some variance within the range, and you may see elevations, but women, the range is generally bigger, pregnant women even more so. And it may also vary, like I said, through parts of the menstrual cycle. But yeah, that's why it's going to be probably at least a little easier to spot in women. And there's a little bit less, I should say, maybe a little bit less that can go wrong in a male when it comes to that hyperprolactinemia. But it definitely can happen, right? So I had another one. We had another little drawing over here looking at, this is dopamine connection, right? So again, we're going back to this hypothalamus. We're going back to dopamine production here, and then the hair there, yeah. Then prolactin production in the pituitary, and this there's this connection between dopamine and it's an inverse connection between dopamine and prolactin. So why do I mention this? Well, that's mainly because of the mood issues, right? So you may see that side effect of low dopamine, so like low motivation, very low drive, potentially lower energy. We look at, as a neurotransmitter, dopamine is normally considered more of an energizing, positive mood, heightening type of neurotransmitter, whereas something like GABA or serotonin may be a little more leveling, or not, I don't want to say sedative, but you know what I mean, a little more feel good, lowering, smoothing type of neurotransmitter. So yeah, there's definitely a connection there. One of the connections that I actually will see here is people on certain antidepressant drugs, Wellbutrin commonly, right? Looking at that dopamine uptake. So yeah, if people are on medications, I should mention that there can be medications, especially some of those antidepressants, if you call them antidepressants, that affect dopamine levels. That might be something to look into if you're seeing a big skewing, or variance in prolactin levels. So I would definitely check that out. All right, moving down. Stuff that some of the people always get very confused. It gets very confusing, right? So the old adages are, especially with your nandrolone, is prolactin levels. You take these, prolactin goes up, you need to take whatever, usually the drugs that I mentioned earlier, cabergoline, bromo, promi, like all these things that people generally use. Now, the problem is most people don't test levels. That's the first issue. I hear people say this all the time, ask them, did you test your levels? And they normally say no. Okay, so let's assume you've tested your levels and it's high, which I said, again, not common. Is there even elevation? Is that even where it's coming from? So short answer is maybe. I've actually seen literature that shows reduction in prolactin here. So that would lead you to believe that no, that does not happen. But there has been other literature showing some increase, dose-dependent increase. So moral of the story would be probably does not, but dose-dependent it may. Now, easy fix, lower the dose. If in fact you see this directly raising this, meaning you have not changed testosterone, you've not changed any other compounds in the stack, you just increase that. Okay. if that happens, and some of the information kind of lends itself to suggest that it's more on a genetic level, more of a gene transcription thing going on, and not so much a receptor thing going on. So yeah, if you do see that, then yes, lower the compound, easy fix. And or if you have a total amount of compound in the stack that you want to be within, flip the ratio. Again, going back to that 80 ratio that you probably hear me talk about or hear us talk about in like the OPD podcast. Easy to fix. You can take something else that will probably lower it some. Masteron is a great example, and flip that into the stack, lower this, boom, easy fix. You don't need any type of ancillary drug there at all. Okay. Testosterone, well, we'll go here. So testosterone, some have suggested testosterone may raise prolactin, and I think that a lot of what we're probably seeing there is this increase in estrogen causing this correlation with the increase in prolactin because of aromatization to estrogen, and boom, we end up here just like we did up here. Okay, so the general consensus is in the absence of high estradiol, you will not see high prolactin. So that would, and the literature seems to support that, and that's why we end up here once again. So does that mean to take an AI? No. So someone asked, because I've gotten asked that before. So if I take an AI, that will lower my prolactin. Well, indirectly, maybe, but again, ADE ratio, go back, change the stack. It's going to balance both estradiol and prolactin, and you're generally probably going to feel better. And boom, there you go. Okay. So what else do we have here? Oh, okay. So yeah, and I mentioned this kind of above, but the prolactin increases, this hyperprolactinemia, potentially causing some GRH interference and causing this low testosterone and low estrogen levels. So I mentioned the low estrogen levels. Now, the low estrogen probably, especially in males, secondary to lack of aromatization because testosterone is low, whereas in females, right, we're seeing more direct estrogen production because from ovarian function. So a little different in males than in females, but yeah, you may see that lowering of sex hormones with hyperprolactinemia. But again, unless we're looking at something like a pituitary tumor, we can almost always trace it back to a thyroid issue, a stress issue causing progesterone steal and estrogen dominance. One of these issues generally is going to be, or like I said, perhaps like a prescription medication issue even. One of those issues is normally the factor, or what we can factor into the high prolactin. So I hope that clears up some of the more general scenarios. I know there's it's kind of a bunch of stuff jumbled in here, but those are the main points. The main points is that it generally does circle back to some of these main issues that I mentioned here, okay? And 9 times out of 10, that's what you're gonna have to fix. Enhanced males, 9 times out of 10, stack correction, balance AD ratio, control the estrogen ratio, or androgen to estrogen ratio with stack design to help control prolactin levels. All right, so it's not necessarily adding any ancillary drugs or anything like that. And there you go. You should be good. It's actually a relatively easy thing to control if with the stack design control, and it almost always corrects itself with corrections of these issues. Now, for the pituitary tumor, that's a different problem. You're definitely going to need to talk to a specialist. But hope that's helpful, guys. Talk to you next time.